which is why I'm also going to get to that in a moment. So first, I would like to start by naming some of the things that libraries and post offices have in common, as these were the initial reasons why also we saw big parallels between the work we do and the work that post offices do. And the first reason is because, well, maybe the most obvious one is because they're both global infrastructures. So post offices, just like libraries, they exist across countries. They exist in both urban and rural areas, and they also in remote places. And they also tend to offer public access to the internet and other services at low or no cost. And also, just as libraries, beyond the fact that they are a network in itself, and they also have a very physical nature, they are physical infrastructure that exists. And of course, you as librarians can also understand the value of this. And another reason, that they have in common is also that they both serve local communities and they're often public institutions, so this one is very clear. They both offer access to connectivity, information devices, and also capacity building. And they're also both multi-purpose spaces. And so just as there's this outdated narrative about libraries being places for books, post offices suffer from the same outdated narrative when people think perhaps they're only places for sending letters or packages, when actually they offer a wide variety of services, particularly digital ones. And another thing is that they often they are often government funded or supported. And so this is also very clear, but post offices, even more so than libraries, tend to be funded by governments, which are the most common, but they also operate in different ways in every country. So they might also be partially or fully privatized, as in the case of Deutsche Post in Germany. But we will not get into so much detail now. And so these are some of the most obvious reasons, and of course there's more reasons that I can fit on these slides, but this is just to make a point that, well, out there is another network that is just like the library network and that has very similar digital advocacy goals as the library network. And so perhaps you can already start to imagine that why this could be an advantage to us to collaborate with them. And now to complement what I shared on the previous slide, of course, we're aware that while there's many similarities, they both also operate in their own contexts. So, of course, libraries facilitate access to information, while post offices facilitate movement of goods, communication, and official documentation. Libraries curate, organize, and democratize access to information, while post offices operate as a logistical infrastructure for physical-digital integration. Libraries empower workforce development, and at the same time, post offices enable digital economy participation. And libraries also promote open access, digital safety, and anonymity, while post offices handle secure identity verification and authentication. And of course, these are also many, many more. And so maybe you're also wondering, but why are post offices so well placed to contribute to digital inclusion? And that's also a very good question. And for this, I would like to start by speaking about the reach, which is also a very big global reach. Even though the postal network is not as extensive as the library network is believed to be, it's still quite big. And it is likely the most geographically extensive retail service network in the world. So as you can see, there's about 650,000 post offices globally, and a majority of them are in rural areas, specifically in places where people are least likely to be online and most at risk of being left behind. And this is also extensive reach is largely due to the sector's universal service obligation. And so what does this mean? This means that all the 192 member states of the Universal Postal Union must designate at least one postal operator who is legally mandated to provide at least the most basic postal services to all citizens within its territory. And so as you can see, this incentivizes post offices to open and also to have delivery staff and to visit places where other providers tend to stay away from. And also, given that the postal network is a really big retail service network, much of the infrastructure is also already in place. So the service counters are staffed, there's electronic payment systems, then they can also even take things a little bit further when they do delivery vehicles that provide services to the people in their own houses. And also finally, and much like libraries, they also enjoy a great deal of having the trust of their communities and of the communities they serve. And so at this point, maybe you're already thinking, but the Post, they only send letters. But yeah, as I said, in reality, they also provide many essential digital services, as you can also see in the slides. And this is something that the communities have demanded for them, so they had to evolve and adapt. And just as with libraries, they have had to deliver on these community needs. And of course, these services are useful for all, but they are especially beneficial for these communities that are less connected and who also may lack internet access at home, or who may not have the proper device, or who may lack the skills, or maybe not even feel comfortable accessing these services on their own. For example, a lot of people tend to go to post offices to access egovernment services. This is something that perhaps also happens in libraries. And yeah, so in essence, there's many of these examples how post offices are being leveraged as what they call one-stop shops for digital services across the world. And maybe by this point, you already start seeing the parallels here with the library infrastructure and some of the things that libraries also do. And this is all just to say that also from a telecommunications perspective, both the library and the postal infrastructures and also their staff have a lot to offer, and sometimes, unfortunately, their services and their resources are underutilized, which is also something that we tend to advocate a lot in international spaces. And so now if we move on to the good part, which is to talk more about, of course, how can libraries benefit from making these partnerships with post offices. And again, there's many more reasons that perhaps I could fit in these slides, but just to mention a couple ones, I can start by saying that, well, they can offer more access to telecommunications infrastructure. So while the postal sector is not the same in every country, so it's very similar as with libraries, every country has a different way to operate. They are very connected to the telecommunications, and in many cases, the postal operator and the National Telecommunications Agency are a single organism, which is something that you're going to see in one of the cases that we're going to present, which is the case of Zimbabwe, and this is also a case that has also facilitated this cooperation not only between the library and the postal sector, but also between the library and the local telecommunications agency. So this, of course, means that establishing this contact with post offices can also mean access to connectivity infrastructure that the libraries might not have, and in some cases, and many, many other, access to other services. And point number 2 is about, of course, having contact with telecommunications authorities, which is the fact that, of course, post service providers tend to have an established relationship with these types of authorities, which is something that doesn't always happen with libraries. And so libraries at the same time might have the opportunity to leverage on these connections and also maybe have the benefit of having access to this additional network, especially if they work a lot on digital related things. And also number 3, well, very obvious one, funding opportunities. And well, as you know, a lot of digital cooperation initiatives are tend to be very high priority for governments and donors. And while this is not a surprise, it is also important to keep framing libraries as what they are, which is part of the broader international digital infrastructure, as this could also attract funding and maybe otherwise be scarce for traditional library service, like for example the universal service funds that are aimed to ensure that everyone can access basic communication and government services. And it can also help sell the narrative, which is true, that libraries also contribute to the economic development of their communities via the activities and the services they offer. Then in the point number 4 is access to digital financial services, which is not something that is necessarily applies to all libraries, but certainly to some, particularly those which are located in remote areas and where people need to perhaps do mobile transactions or mobile payments. And this is something that might be used for them. And number 5 is a lot of shared capacity building, and this is a really important one because this is something that we have observed that reduces costs, and it's also something that the person from the case study is going to talk about, how, For example, libraries might have more expertise to exchange on digital literacy and perhaps other themes, while post offices might have more expertise in, for example, e-commerce or local entrepreneurship. And there's also an opportunity of, doing joint capacity building efforts and also a lot of knowledge sharing. And finally, we also have the joint digital advocacy. So as we converge in many spaces, it's also useful to have an ally like this network, because it can also help amplify our voices in those spaces. And for example, spaces like the Internet Governance Forum, the World Summit on the Information Society, or maybe even at a local and national level with local telecommunications agencies, and many others as well. And this is just a slide that I also wanted to share from one of the events we did recently at the World Summit on the Information Society, where we collaborated with the Universal Postal Union. And as I mentioned, I'm going to play the video of one of our partners who did a case of collaboration between the library and the post office in Zimbabwe. But I'm also sharing these photos to show, because in there we had an intervention from the person who in this case is the director from the Postal and Telecommunications Agency in Zimbabwe. And it was also very interesting to see how, in a way, libraries had also been collaborating with post offices, and in some case, libraries made use of what they call community information centers that the post offices have, that have connectivity, and perhaps some libraries don't have at a local level. And so we also advocated a lot for the fact that they are both what we call overlooked intermediaries, and they do a lot of, they provide a lot of financial, informational, and different kinds of services to their communities, and that are often sometimes not funded or recognized as they should be. And so now if we get to the part on how to create these library post office connections, because we also know this is not always very clear, and even though the steps don't have to be the same, we always advise first to, for example, if you decide that you would like to collaborate with the post office, either at a local level or national level, of course, a first step would be to maybe define your case. So to first have a very clear idea of what do you want to do. So normally this would be also through the drafting of a memorandum of understanding, and what kind of agreement do you want to do, what are the conditions or the deliverables, the timeline, what is the level of the impact you want to do, either regional, national, local, different. And what I would also want to offer from the side of IFLA is we can also have a support meeting, for example, if you would be interested in knowing how to build these partnerships. We would also be happy to arrange this and perhaps advise you on how to draft the agreement and many, many other things. And then, of course, it would be, all of this would be to be done to put you in touch with the postal service provider. And I also added in there additionally also with the National Library Association intervention, which this only applies, of course, if the initiative is going to be at a national level. But we also think that would be a great collaboration and a way to start an initiative like that in a certain country. And then, of course, identify shared goals with the postal service provider. What kind of things do you think they could bring to your local library network, and what kind of things do you think you could offer in exchange? And this must be accompanied by some sort of training, perhaps webinar, mostly to orient the library and the post office staff that don't tend to be used to working or exchanging with each other. Of course, that will eventually lead to the start of the partnership, and what we would also recommend once you start these partnerships is, of course, to monitor the interventions, what have been the successes of these types of partnerships, the challenges, and also eventually build that relationship, or try to aim to build a relationship with the telecommunications regulatory authorities of the country, because we also think it could be important for your digital advocacy. And something that I also want to add here is that, of course, in these recommendations, I include IFLA, but you are not necessarily forced to involve us if you want to reach out personally to the local postal service provider or your local post office. But we do want to offer the support in case it is needed, and we are also happy to make the connections and also to draw from the network of the Universal Postal Union, which we luckily now have this partnership and access to. And so now, before playing the video that I mentioned, which is going to be a short presentation, so when we started exploring this topic, we thought, okay, is there already some evidence of this type of collaboration? And we were not really sure that there was, because the most common evidence of this type of collaboration are interlibrary loans. But this is not really what we were looking for, as we were looking for something more on the digital side. And luckily, we came across this case in Zimbabwe, which is from Nancy, as I mentioned, deputy librarian from the Women's University in Africa, but also working for the Zimbabwe Information Empowerment Center. And she made a connection that started first being a local connection with the local post offices, but that eventually grew into a more national strategy where libraries and post offices are collaborating to use each other's spaces, resources, and also to provide connectivity to the libraries that don't have connectivity in certain regions. But of course, I won't tell you more about this because I think she can explain it better, so I'm just going to play the video for you.
Hello everyone, my name is Nancy Kwangwa from Zimbabwe. I'm so excited to be part of this conversation where we are deliberating on the critical role of two global infrastructures, that is the post offices and libraries. So in my presentation, I am going to look at a case study where collaborative efforts between the library and post office has yielded some results in as far as digital inclusion is concerned. So some bit of background, as you have heard probably in the introduction, we still have a significant number of people who are not online. That is about 2.6 billion. And when you look at marginalized groups in our communities, they face systemic barriers, that is cost, access to devices, skills, and so on. And when you look at digital exclusion, it deepens poverty, limits opportunities, and fuels inequalities. Because as we reflect on the world that we're living in today, if you are not connected, you miss out on several opportunities. And as libraries, we have a critical role to ensure that everyone is included so that they participate in e-government, e-commerce, educational opportunities, and so on. Therefore, there's a need for trusted intermediaries like libraries to close this gap. If we look at our libraries currently, they are facing multiple challenges, and among them include budgetary cuts for acquisition of books, acquisition of computers, subscription to the internet, and also staffing issues. So this then calls for innovative approaches in which, as libraries, we need to collaborate with already existing systems and infrastructure in our community, that is the post offices. So just an introduction or background to the Zimbabwe Postal Services, which in this presentation I'll term ZimPost. It's a postal service previously known for delivering mail and other things, but they have evolved over time in bridging the digital divide in the country, where they've introduced community information centers initially, and they are repurposing them into digital information centers. So here in Zimbabwe, you'd find that in big cities, in small cities, in rural communities, where there's a business center, you always find a post office. So they are purposing these to include digital services, where they provide e-government services, e-commerce, community engagement, digital literacy skills, and access to the internet. And in terms of the initiative's statistics, as of now, you'd find that in total, there are 188 digital information centers in the country, and then they are structured in different ways. For instance, at post offices, that is the significant number. If you check on the statistics here, it's 76% of digital centers that are at post offices. And then they were innovative to introduce what are called containerized digital information centers, where they use containers, those that are used for shipping, to come up with an access point. There are also 8% of the brick and mortar digital centers, and also repurposed spaces to introduce these digital centers in our different communities. However, there are some challenges that are faced in these digital information centers. For instance, timely and relevant information in rural and underserved communities. There are also issues of infrastructure like electricity, secure safe enclosures for e-commerce activities, limited digital literacy, that is access to online research, use of artificial intelligence tools. And these days everyone's talking about artificial intelligence. And when you look at the remote communities, for instance, in our country here in Zimbabwe, we find that the majority of our population, that is over 50%, they are in rural communities, and they need to have these skills, they need to be connected. So if you look at these challenges that are being faced by the Zimbabwe Postal Services when it comes to their digital information centers, vis-a-vis what we offer as libraries, you see that we can provide the solution when it comes to timely and relevant information. As librarians, we are known for providing access to relevant information. When it comes to digital literacy, we always provide training programs on digital literacy skills. Then here, just to explain how we are premising digital inclusion, we are looking at access, the skills, information and data, affordability, trust, and safety. So when we are now working on the collaborations, we need to have a holistic approach when it comes to digital inclusion. So from my experience, I've noticed that just provision of devices, just connectivity to the internet doesn't really fully address issues of digital inclusion. But there has to be skills. Our communities need to be skilled with the necessary digital literacy in terms of how they navigate these platforms. There are issues of relevant information and data. As librarians, what are we doing to ensure that our communities have access to information that is relevant to their context? For example, most of the digital information centers are in the rural communities where they rely on small-scale agricultural activities, so they need information about markets, about farming, climate, and so on. That is relevant to their context. So as librarians, we are known for curating information, and we jump in and collaborate with post offices to ensure that in these community information centers, there are local repositories of information that they can make reference to and make decisions about their economic and other social activities. Then there are issues of trust and safety. The internet is open, there's internet freedom. So as librarians, we need to provide services in terms of training on digital rights, digital safety, so that as communities navigate in these digital spaces, they have the relevant skills and knowledge to understand the information landscape that they operate in. So if we reflect, you'd find that the library is at the center, the post office is at the center, hence the need for collaboration when it comes to digital inclusion and access to information. So I'll share an experience, a case of some of the work that we are doing here to promote digital inclusion through the Zimbabwe Information and Technology Empowerment Center, which is a non-profit organization established specifically to promote digital equity and access to information in underserved communities. So to do this, we have programs that we have implemented and still implementing, and our focus is on those individuals or communities that are outside the formal systems. So if we look at our library setting here in Zimbabwe, we'd find that libraries in formal institutions like universities, colleges, schools, they are so organized and access to this is clear. But when it comes to those members in the communities who are not affiliated to any institution, it's sometimes so hard. Hence, the need to then work with the post offices, which are communal spaces, to provide such services. So to date, as an organization, we have provided training to over 10,000 people on digital and AI literacy programs, training on online safety and entrepreneurship. And we have done a comprehensive national program on building resilience against disinformation, and also strengthening libraries as community digital hubs where we support local public libraries, programs around media and information literacy. We also contribute to advocacy and policy making efforts. For example, we're part of the consultative team that submitted some contributions towards the development of the UN Digital Compact and also the UNESCO Declaration on Financing of Media and Information Literacy Programs, and also contributed in the drafting of the Zimbabwe National Artificial Intelligence Strategy. We also mobilize resources such as books to support school libraries in under-resourced communities. So we've been doing this as an organization. So we are now collaborating with the post offices to maximize or to promote digital inclusion in the country. So here are some of the strategies that are in our proposed partnership: provision of free internet and ICT access, something that is already being provided by the ZimPost through the digital information centers, building digital literacy skills in our communities, and being mindful that we are working with individuals who are at different levels when it comes to digital skills. Some, they need skills from cell phone on how to use a mobile phone, to advanced skills on coding and programming. So we work to conduct needs assessments so that we design programs that are suitable to their community. So in conclusion, I would say that investing in libraries and post offices ensures that no one is left behind in the digital age. And let's explore collaborative opportunities with our post offices to advance digital inclusion and see how we can work together to advance this cause. Thank you very much for your time, and I wish you a wonderful stay in Astana and enjoy the rest of the conference. Let's keep in touch. Here are the contacts where you can reach me if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Let's collaborate and make sure that libraries, they work together with post offices to advance digital inclusion. Thank you very much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed Nancy's presentation. And so, yes, you can see there's one of the successful cases, which is why we used it. We are currently using it to draft case studies, and we're also going to draft a joint policy report with the Universal Postal Union. But this is just to add, this is a partnership that started with something very simple, just as having a conversation with the local library, and then eventually built up into a national strategy. So this is just an example of how you can build your own partnership either locally, but it can also build into something bigger if you would like to, and we would also be happy to support you in that process. And so now I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Damilare, who's also going to come to talk a little bit about one of the connectivity projects that we're also currently doing at IFLA. Thank you.
Hello everyone and good afternoon. I'll be walking us through the Libraries Boosting Connectivity project. I'll be sharing context from the lens of African library associations championing progress for library connectivity. So what is the Library Boosting Connectivity project? The goal we're working towards here is to see how we can work with libraries and library associations to gather crucial data on how libraries are navigating and adapting to digital landscape. And more importantly, understanding what library connectivity is available there, and also how strong are this connectivity, and how libraries can remain trusted gateways to information and opportunity, right? And diving further into why is this important, why are we doing this? One of the few things we're looking at here is to understand the essential roles of libraries as anchor institution for digital access. In the context of, we live in a world where education, work, civic life are all online, and libraries representation is very important in that particular context. And more importantly, looking at the evolving roles of libraries in society. Libraries are not just all about books alone, as we all know that. We are community hubs for digital literacy, innovation, and digital services, and more importantly, access to opportunities in the digital economy. Okay, understanding the library that's strengths and gaps will ensure that libraries can keep the pace with emerging technologies and emerging needs of a society. So, over the past couple of months, we've had a pilot across the globe, but in this presentation, I'll be speaking more on the African context from Nigeria, Namibia, Kenya, and Zambia. Three major things we noticed in the course of our engagement is what I call AOC, which is acceptance, ownership, and curiosity, right? And throughout this particular approach, I'll be sharing with you contextual insights into various country narrative on what I mean by AOC, acceptance, ownership, and curiosity. So in Nigeria, we were able to work with the Nigerian Library Association and the National Library of Nigeria. In Namibia, we were able to work with NIWAN, with the Library Association in Namibia. And in Kenya, we were able to work with the Kenya Library Association and the Kenya National Library Services. And in Zambia, we were able to work with the Zambia Library Services. And this gave us a pathway to ownership from library stakeholders in country, and I saw this as part of their engagement. But however, going back to the point on acceptance, earlier I had mentioned about points on AOC, acceptance, ownership, and curiosity. So diving into what do we mean by acceptance based on the key takeaways we got from there. Acceptance of the evolving roles of libraries in the digital age. One thing we witnessed is that we saw the understanding of the shift in the position of libraries as critical players in bridging digital divide in Africa. And that was something we saw the library associations are willing to work on. And one action that we saw in the acceptance is that they appointed representative to coordinate the library business connectivity projects in these countries with us, and also we led with them virtual sessions to engage librarians in each country to drive ownership and acceptance of the initiative. And progressing from there to ownership. What we also saw is that there was this ownership to improving library services in the digital age, right? And in this context, we saw the understanding of the roles of libraries to take responsibility to engage digital development agencies in government, institutions, and development partners to attract funding and build trust, okay, and also demonstrate the impact of libraries in the community they serve. And a couple of things that was done, a key action point there that we saw was mobilization of librarians and library associations to respond to the survey that we shared. And more importantly, they engage online to share publicity about the library's boosting connectivity projects. And diving further to curiosity, the curiosity part of this led to explore emerging technologies and innovation digital age. The question that was asked was, what's next after this survey, after this pilot? What can we do better? What can be done to improve library service delivery in the digital age? And who do we engage at various levels? All this connotes to the curiosity of librarians as agents of change in the digital economy. And what is the roadmap ahead like looking forward over the next couple of months? We've done a very good job with the pilot, which we completed recently with the Libraries Boosting Connectivity Survey. And currently, my colleague Maria is finalizing the report, which will be ready very soon. And going forward from there, we'll be launching a virtual live dashboard to track library connectivity status across the world. That will empower librarians to be able to engage stakeholders in country to drive advocacy efforts for libraries. And more importantly, to link this to existing interventions by IFLA already. This will be linked to the library map of the world. And as we scale this further, we'll be engaging other library associations and institutions across the globe to expand more on this and have more libraries engaged on this. And as I conclude today, I'm going to say as librarians, by accepting the evolving roles of libraries, taking ownership to improve library service delivery, and the curiosity to explore technologies and innovation in the digital age, we can secure libraries as essential anchors of community development in the digital age. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, Damilare. And yeah, well, as he already mentioned, but just to say this again, as he said, we're working on finalizing the report of the survey that we piloted in all of these countries, and we're going to publish the report in September. But of course, this is also something that we want to align with the library map of the world, and also we would like to do that survey if there's a possibility in other countries, in our regions. So if you're also curious about it, also feel free to reach out. And so now that we have arrived to the end of the session, I would like to know if any of you have any questions. So we're a small group, so if you want, you can just raise your hand, and if you don't want to raise your hand, you can just join Menti with this code, or scanning the QR code, and we will see your answers there. And I will give you a couple minutes. Giving me the link to submit is so strange. Well, I think apparently there's a problem with the link, so I guess we'll have to go by hand. Apologies for that. So if you could please raise your hand if you have a question. I think there's a question. It's working? So I think the problem is that we cannot put it on the screen. For some reason, it's not working when we click on the link. We cannot show you the results, but... yeah. Okay, well, while we log in, I will say, well, please raise your hands. If I see someone has raised their hand. there a microphone that we can? Yes, of course. Feel free to. Absolutely. Just to repeat the question, thank you. He asked, what are the legal basis of this partnership between the libraries and post offices? So perhaps if you arrived a little bit later, and so the legal basis of that is that, well, from the side of IFLA, we signed an MOU with this Universal Postal Union, but in your case, I think it would be very similar, and this is what they did in the Zimbabwe case as well. So they also started with signing an MOU that was not, well, financially binding for any of the parties, for both the library and the post office. And normally they signed a 2-year agreement to see how the partnership works in the first 2 years. And then after those 2 years, when they saw, well, the potential there was and the things that they could do together, they decided to also collaborate in more on like a basis of a more, well, like a partnership agreement that in their case did have some financial, well, exchange of some services and resources. But what I would advise at the beginning is to do an MOU at a local level for 1 or 2 years perhaps, and then see if based on that you can build on future, or perhaps doing it at a bigger scale or national level. I see another question there. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, so that we would absolutely love to. What we are doing now, as I said, we started piloting in a couple countries because we know it's such a big effort to make a proper collection of data, and we also started by focusing mainly on public libraries. But now that we published the report, what we do want to do is continue gathering the data in other countries. And for that, of course, we also need librarians and associations who would be interested in joining us in these efforts. So if you would like to do that, for example, at your national level, we would be really happy to chat and organize that. Thanks. So I see there's other questions in the Menti. Unfortunately, you cannot see them, but I can read them for you. And someone asked, with post offices, is there any risk of overshadowing, replacing the role of libraries as connectivity hubs? What could be done to mitigate this risk? And so this is a really good question, and it is also something that I think we have discussed before, the risk that there is some sort of, it can be perceived as competition at a local level to provide connectivity. But we have realized, at least for example in the case of Zimbabwe, that the services tend to be more complementary, and also that the communities and the target users tend to see both libraries and post offices as, like, for example, people go more to the post offices to do financial or government related services, and they tend to come to the library more for access to information or to open source resources. And so we do notice that normally the target user of these two places is different, and it complements each other. And so from the side or from the case study that we have in Zimbabwe, we haven't really seen an experience that has been competition between the libraries and the post offices. It's more like these services have found to be complementary, and they also have laid out very clearly in the agreement that they signed. So this is why I also would advise, even before approaching us, to establish that relationship with the post office or with the UPU. It would be good that you already have a good idea, perhaps, of what would be the things that you would like the post office to help you achieve, and vice versa, so that we can also help you avoid this risk of overlapping work. So I also see other question. Yeah, I already read that one. What works best in building the confidence to be curious? That's a really good question. Hard to answer, but
So I would say on this particular question, over time, what I've done to address this with librarians is to show them a bigger picture of things. Let them see themselves as advocates for change, them see themselves as ownership of this change, and they get to see the opportunities this brings to them. In terms of if libraries are connected, that will bring more jobs for the libraries, that will bring more users to the libraries, and seeing how libraries can play a multifunctional role in society. And through that, they're still curious and asking questions of, oh, I want to go back, of what's next, what can be done, what can we do to improve, and who do we engage at various levels. So that's how it drives curiosity towards improvement. Thank you so much. Maria.
thank you, Damilare. And so we have 2 questions left. And I also see that someone wrote, are there other organizations focused on digital inclusion, like CITEC, for example, that libraries could work with? And I think this is something that would have to explore probably together at a local level. In this case, CITEC, we made the connection with them because Nancy in this case also works, as I said, she's the deputy librarian of the Women's University in Africa. So that's where the connection came to be, because CITEC tends to do or implement a lot of the activities in libraries. But of course, we are also open to exploring that in your own countries and see if there's perhaps other non-profit organizations that you can also work with, if maybe you feel like they would complement to the work of what your library is doing, and that would maybe perhaps be an additional intermediary in this process. And then the final question says, there is another question saying, if there are no reciprocal services between libraries and post offices, how can we still build a meaningful partnership? And I also think it's an interesting one because, for me, it's also an opportunity to build those reciprocal services. So of course, sometimes the connection is not that clear at the beginning, but I would advise you to think perhaps if your library is working on digital inclusion, maybe I would advise you to think about what are the gaps that you're currently having in your digital related programs or your digital advocacy. And if any of these gaps can be filled with this type of partnership, which as I said I think the answer is very likely to be yes if you're working in something digital related, because as I said, the post offices have really already good established relationships with local operators and postal service providers. So I think perhaps that would be a good exercise also to think about. And I also think it could be interesting to maybe do that and lay it out in the MOU and the agreement that you want to do. And then the final question says, if post offices are not functioning in a country, what other community institutions could libraries collaborate with to share space, resources, and support digital skills training? And well, this one is also really interesting, and it's also a hard question because, well, in this session we were mainly targeting the topic of post offices, but what I would advise you in this case is just to reach out to local organizations like CITEC in this case, that might already be working with libraries. So if your library already works with other NGOs at a local level on digital related activities or advocacy, then I would advise you to maybe reach out to them and see if there's a possibility there. And then there's a last question. I don't know if you want
Just to add up to the last question, is that you can also engage development partners in your various countries, such as ISOC. There are various chapters in various countries you can engage and partner with to work with your libraries as you progress on your work. Thank you.
And I just saw one last question. Someone asked, do you think university libraries can enter this arena of library post offices service? And I also like this question because I think definitely yes. And for example, to tell you a story from the Zimbabwe case, one of the things that CITEC was doing with the library is that they were doing courses for youth who were coming out of university. And so they were doing courses in digital capacity building, but it was mainly courses focused at integrating them with skills, digital skills, and many types of skills into the workforce. And this was also interacting with the post offices, and these community information centers was one of the reasons that, or one of the things that helped them not only have a space to do these courses, but also make sure that when they did these courses, they had enough devices or enough capacity to deliver or facilitate the courses. So I think definitely library universities can also be part of this. Okay. Well, I think we answered all the questions. So if you don't have any questions left, I would like to thank you for being in this session. And also please encourage you to reach out to us if you would like to build partnerships like the one you mentioned, and we would be really happy to hear from you. Thank you.